It was a cold February night in 2022, the kind of night where the wind whispered through the trees and an eerie silence blanketed the small town of Oak Ridge. I had recently moved into a weathered old house that had been in my family for generations, tucked away at the end of a long gravel road. I was home alone, working late on my freelance writing, with nothing but the soft glow of my laptop and the rhythmic tapping of rain against the window to keep me company. As I typed away, a sudden rap on the front door jolted me from my focus. I glanced at the clock. It was 11:45 p.m. My heart raced. Visitors at this hour were rare. With a feeling of unease creeping in, I muted the music playing softly in the background and stood up to approach the door, every step feeling heavier than the last. Peering through the peephole, I was met with an unsettling sight. A man stood on my porch, dressed in a dark raincoat and holding a nondescript cardboard box. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat, but I could make out a sharp jawline and an unyielding stare directed right at my door. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the lock, wondering if I should even open the door at all. The longer I looked, the more I felt an involuntary chill creeping down my spine. What was a delivery at this hour? I took a breath, unlatched the door slightly, and called through the wood, asking if he had the right house. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he shifted his weight and then slowly raised the box toward me as if it were an offering. His voice was low and compelling, almost a whisper, as he stated that the package required my signature. I asked him for the recipient's name, and he hesitated too long, causing my gut to twist with suspicion. I was already on edge, and something about his demeanor felt wrong, like he was studying me rather than delivering something. Deciding to trust my instincts, I told him there was no one here by that name. The man's expression shifted imperceptibly. It was almost as if he frowned with disappointment. He lowered the box slowly, his eyes flicking to the side. In a hushed tone, he muttered that he must have made a mistake and began to retreat down the steps, not taking his eyes off me until he rounded the corner of the house. I shut the door, locking it tight and peering through the blinds. My heart thudded in my chest as I listened for the sound of his footsteps fading into the night. But there was only silence. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was nothing, just a simple delivery gone wrong. Still, I found it hard to concentrate on my writing, my mind wandering every time the wind howled outside. The following night, as I sat in the same spot writing, I half expected another knock but told myself it would be ridiculous for him to return yet. Just as the clock struck 11:45 p.m. yet again, a few firm knocks echoed through the house, vibrating the very walls. This time, I felt my stomach drop. There was no way it could be a coincidence. Slowly, I walked to the door again, my heart racing with every step as I peeked through the peephole. It was him again, standing in the same exact spot, the same cardboard box still in his hands. My breath hitched in my throat. I felt frozen. I didn't move a muscle, the urge to scream bubbling just beneath the surface. After what felt like an eternity, I heard him speak again, this time demanding that the package be signed for. Words escaped me, and I finally mustered the courage to call out that I wouldn't sign for something that didn't belong to me. He paused, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of annoyance cross his face before it settled back into an unsettling calm. Moments later, he simply turned on his heel and walked away, his steps softening until I couldn't hear him leave. That night, I barely slept, every creak of the old house a reminder of his presence. I resolved to call the police in the morning if he returned. Sure enough, on the third consecutive night, the knocking came again, but this time it was no gentle rap. It was forceful and demanding, echoing like a death knell in the dark. I was trembling as I stood next to the door, the weight of dread oppressing my chest. Summoning every ounce of courage, I peeked through the peephole again. Yet again, it was that same man, but this time he wasn't holding a box. He stood there empty-handed, arms relaxed at his sides, his gaze piercing through the door as if he could see me. I felt the instinct to retreat. I could feel his eyes boring into my soul, and the room began to swirl. I could hear him breathing, softly at first, then louder, each exhale sending shivers deep into my marrow. Just when I thought he might turn and leave like the other nights, he stepped back and whispered something unintelligible, a hoarse murmur that made my blood run cold. Forcing myself to stay quiet, I slowly backed away from the door, heart pounding in sync with the thunderous sound of my own pulse. The silence that followed was deafening. I waited, every second stretching into an eternity. The sounds of the house settling felt almost like laughter, mocking my fear. Finally, I mustered the strength to walk to the window and peek through the curtain, and to my shock, he was still there, just staring at the door, unmoving. My stomach churned as I saw his eyes catch the light from the street lamp, reflecting back like shards of glass. After what felt like an unbearable amount of time, he turned and strolled away toward the trees lining the roadside. I collapsed against the wall, panting, relief flooding my system but mingled with bone-deep terror. I thought of calling the police but hesitated. Who would believe me about a man who didn't try to enter? He left no evidence, no sign of wrongdoing, just his terrifying visits at odd hours. The following morning, I decided to take a stand. I dressed hastily, feeling the weight of the night pressing heavily upon me. I reached out to the police, recounting the bizarre encounters. They promised to increase patrols in my area, but their assurances felt empty, just more words in the cool morning air. I returned home, locking every door and window tight behind me. As the sun dipped again into the horizon hours later, tension coiled in my stomach. I turned off all the lights in the house, waiting, heart pounding in rhythm with the ticking clock. I didn't want another visit, but as 11:45 p.m. approached, I could almost feel his presence lurking in the shadows. And then it happened. 3 raps echoed through the hall, firm and resolute. I felt paralyzed, the air thick with dread. This time, though, I stood my ground, refusing to even approach the door. I could hear my own breath, quick and shallow, drowning out the sound of the knocks. I was no longer just a victim. I was aware of the grip of fear transforming into survival instinct. But after the raps subsided, I heard something different. A soft, slithering sound creeping along my house's exterior, like a whisper carried on the wind, chilling me to the bone. I pressed my ear against the door, listening intently, hoping to glean some understanding of what was happening outside. The knocking came again, but now accompanied by a strange rustling. I backed away slowly, feeling an icy sweat trickle down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Peering through the blinds one last time, I saw him there, just out of view, his silhouette framed by the flickering streetlight. He was close, too close, and as I stood there trembling, I realized that I might just be the next package delivered. It was the first week of August 2023 when I decided to spend some time at my late grandmother's house in a small coastal town in Maine. The scent of the sea and the sound of waves crashing against the rocky shores always brought me comfort. The house itself was old, with creaky floorboards, and a history that felt palpable in the air. I loved spending nights there listening to the stories it seemed to tell in the quiet hours after everyone had gone to bed. On the second night of my stay, I was curled up in an armchair reading an old book, the kind with yellowed pages and an alluring musty smell. The evening had been calm, the only sounds punctuating the silence being the soft hum of the wind outside and the occasional call of seabirds. It was right around 10 p.m. when I heard it for the first time, a distinct knock, sharp and clear, echoing through the stillness of the house. Startled, I put the book down and strained to listen. I assumed it was the old wood settling, but the knock came again, persistent this time. My heartbeat quickened, and I felt a shiver race down my spine. Surely it was just the wind playing tricks, or perhaps it was my imagination running wild. I tried to dismiss it, but the sound repeated, 3 firm knocks, echoing from the front door. Deciding to investigate, I stood up and approached the door slowly, my footsteps muffled by the plush carpet. As I neared the door, I felt an inexplicable sense of dread wash over me. I peered through the peephole, my pulse racing. Nothing, just the vacant porch illuminated by the flickering light above it. I stood there for a moment, staring into the darkness, trying to convince myself that it wasn't anything to worry about. I opened the door just a crack, and a cold gust of wind rushed in, causing me to shiver. I called out into the night, asking if anyone was there, but was met with silence. Frowning, I stepped back inside and shut the door firmly. Maybe it was just the neighbor playing a prank. I shook off the feeling and returned to my book, but the tranquility of the evening felt shattered. Half an hour later, as I was about to turn off my bedside lamp and settle down for the night, I heard it again, 3 knocks, harder this time. I was caught off guard, my heart racing in my chest. It felt too late for anyone to be knocking at my door, and the sound echoed ominously through the desolate house. I felt the walls close in around me, and dread settled like a stone in my stomach. Cautiously, I turned off my lamp and slipped out of bed, creeping toward the door. My heart thumped loudly in my ears as I pressed my face against the peephole. The porch was still empty. I saw only shadows dancing, but I sensed something. I wasn't alone. A chill crept over me as I heard what seemed like a whisper just outside the door, soft but insistent, like a siren's call. I recoiled, fear washing over me like a dark tide. Who was out there? I felt paralyzed with fear, unable to move or make a sound. I pressed my back against the door, heart racing, straining to hear through the thick wood. Again, the knocking came, but it was different this time. A single knock followed by a pause, then a whisper that sent a shiver down my spine. Let me in. With each demand, I felt my resolve crumbling. I didn't want to answer. I felt a primal instinct to flee, but I couldn't shake the strange compulsion drawing me to the door. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I finally decided to call out, asking who was there. Silence enveloped me again, thick and suffocating, and just as I turned to retreat, I heard another knock, followed by that same whisper, only closer this time. It was then I made a critical mistake. I opened the door a crack, just enough to peer outside, and my heart dropped. Standing at the threshold was a figure shrouded in darkness, their features obscured, save for the faint glimmer of eyes staring back at me, reflective like a predator locking onto its prey. I felt the breath leave my lungs, the world tipping on its axis as I slammed the door shut. I leaned against the door, my body trembling, praying I hadn't made a sound loud enough for it to hear, but then the whisper came again, louder this time, demanding to be let in. Each word dripped with malice, and I realized I might have just invited something sinister into my life. I called the police, my voice frantic as I explained the situation, but something told me it was too late. I sank to the floor, listening, praying for morning light. The knocking persisted, punctuated by that horrific whisper demanding entry, weaving a chilling melody of uncertainty. Hours seemed to stretch as I stayed curled up, hyper-aware of every noise outside the door. Anxiety gripped me like an unrelenting vice as the whispers began to blend with the sound of my pulse, creating a jarring symphony of fear. Somewhere along the way, I must have drifted off, for I was jolted awake by a violent banging that rattled the very foundations of the house. My heart raced, and for a moment, I thought I could feel a presence lingering just beyond the door. The whispers had quieted, but the knocking was back, furious and relentless. I bolted upright, dread flooding through me. I couldn't stay here anymore. I scrambled to my feet and grabbed my phone, ready to escape through the back door. But as I crossed the living room, I noticed something chilling, a shadow flickering at the edge of my vision. I turned, and there it was again, the dark figure I had glimpsed earlier, now standing just in front of the front door, watching me with those piercing eyes. As I realized I was trapped, the knocking ceased abruptly. An unnatural silence followed, and that feeling of dread thickened in the air. I could feel something shift, an unseen tension growing, but I refused to give in to panic. Instead, I bolted for the kitchen, praying the back door would be my escape from this nightmare. As I reached for the doorknob, I froze upon hearing a whisper, different from before. It was my grandmother's voice calling from the hallway. I turned back toward the living room, torn between safety and curiosity. I could hear her soft voice, pleading for me to join her, but my instincts screamed at me to run. In that split second, I faced the terrifying realization that this house was no longer a home, it had become a prison. But then I heard a knock again, this time at the back door, the sound reverberating through the walls like a taunt. I had to make a choice. I wrestled with my fear. I could either confront whatever was happening or try to flee into the night. The darkness felt alive, pressing in on me like 1,000 eyes watching from every corner. I knew one thing for certain, I was not alone. In the end, I gripped the doorknob tightly, ready to face whatever lay on the other side of the door. Just as I turned the handle, one final knock echoed through the house, and I realized the figure from before was standing directly behind me, breath chilling against my neck. I hesitated as the door opened, the haunting silence ringing in my ears, and I was left to wonder what would greet me next. In the quiet town of Millwood, October always brought with it a crisp chill and a sense of unease that seemed to linger in the air. I had just moved into a small two-bedroom rental by myself after securing a new job at the local newspaper in early September. The house was charming but old, with creaky stairs and a sagging porch that had seen better days. It was the kind of place you could imagine being cozy, but in the eerie twilight hours, it felt like a setting for something far less innocent. It was a Wednesday night, around 10 p.m., the night air cool against my skin as I settled in with a cup of tea and a pile of paperwork. I had just finished writing an article and was looking forward to a few minutes of relaxation when I heard it, a single knock on the front door. I paused, my stomach tightening slightly. I didn't get many visitors, I wasn't expecting anyone, and the timing felt off. I shrugged it off as perhaps a lost neighbor or delivery person, though it struck me as odd that they would come so late. Curiosity got the better of me, and I walked to the door, glancing through the peephole. To my surprise, I found an older man, perhaps in his late 60s, wearing a faded flannel shirt and a well-worn baseball cap. He looked harmless enough, with a kind wrinkled face that seemed friendly enough, but there was something about his presence that set off alarm bells in my mind. I opened the door just a crack, keeping the chain on, and asked what he needed. He smiled softly and informed me that he lived a few houses down and had brought over a pie as a welcome gift. My heart warmed at the gesture, but my instincts kicked in. Why was he bringing me a pie at such a late hour? It seemed like an excuse to make contact, and something about his smile felt overly broad. As I stood there, half listening, I noticed he kept glancing past me into my home, his smile never wavering. I replied in a polite tone that I appreciated the thought, but I was busy and didn't want to take up his time. He appeared to process my words too slowly, the smile lingering uncomfortably before he finally asked if I was sure I didn't want to join him for tea and a slice of pie. I felt a shiver race down my spine as I realized he wasn't leaving anytime soon. I closed the door slightly, my heart pounding. The warmth of the moment began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of dread. I reiterated that I was busy, and just as I was about to turn away, I heard another knock. It was softer this time, almost timid, but it sent a jolt through me. I caught a glimpse of him changing his stance, his body language shifting as he leaned in closer, murmuring that he had all the time in the world if I wanted some company. My instincts screamed at me to shut the door completely, but fear held me paralyzed for a moment too long. I took a deep breath, summoning what courage I had left to remind myself that it was still my home, and I had every right to feel safe within it. I told him I appreciated it, but I wouldn't be able to accept his invitation. His smile faded slightly, the warmth replaced by an unsettling look. In an instant, that friendly facade cracked, and I could see a hint of irritation flashing in his eyes. He lingered a moment longer before backing away, almost reluctantly, his gaze not leaving mine as he stepped back toward the darkness of the street. I watched him until he disappeared from view, heart racing as I hurried to bolt the door and retreat to my cozy living room. I attempted to chalk it up to paranoia, but as I settled back down on the couch, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The house, which moments before had felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a cage, closing in on me as shadows danced along the walls. After a while, I convinced myself to let it go, pouring another cup of tea and returning to my work. But no sooner had I settled back in when there was another knock, louder this time, echoing throughout the house. I gripped the armrest tightly, fighting against the sudden wave of panic. I resisted the urge to answer, instead choosing to remain silent, hoping he would assume I wasn't home. The knocking continued, escalating into a frantic rhythm that seemed almost desperate, striking my heart with every blow. A knot formed in my throat, and the beam of light from my front lamp flickered as I fought to steady my breath. I thought of calling the police. Surely they could help, but the idea of vocalizing my fear felt far more dangerous than waiting in the silence. It was then that I noticed the sound had shifted. The knocking sounded less like an attempt to get my attention and more like an angry warning. I caught sight of my phone on the table and grabbed it to call. But just as I dialed, the sound changed completely. I heard a soft scrape against the doorframe, as if he were testing the weakness directly. I froze, paralyzed by a blend of confusion and terror. Images of what could happen flashed across my mind. An intrusion, a violation of my safety. I placed my phone down and tiptoed toward the window, the curtains drawn to just the right angle for a glimpse outside. Nothing but darkness stared back, but I felt the suffocating weight of his presence lurking nearby, waiting for the first sign of my vulnerability. Just when I gathered the courage to retreat back into the safety of the living room, I heard another knock, firm and resolute, followed by his voice calling my name. My heart plummeted at the sound, the familiarity of it sending chills down my spine. He knew my name. I was completely exposed, an unwelcome realization washing over me as I stumbled backward, the walls closing in tightly around me. I felt trapped, paralyzed in fear, as my mind raced through all the possible scenarios. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was locked in silence, my body refusing to obey. Then, in a moment of panic, I darted for the back door, praying the locks would hold just a little longer. As I wrestled with the stubborn lock, I heard one final knock, harder, more frantic, before the front door creaked open, revealing the shadows waiting just beyond. In that moment of sheer terror, I braced myself for what was to come, knowing deep down that whatever stood behind me, whether it was a lurking stranger or an ill-fated paranormal encounter, would forever alter the sanctity of my home. I held my breath, uncertain of my fate, feeling the weight of darkness encroach.